Welcome. I'm Sramek, the founder and CEO of California Forever. And we are the proponents of the East Solano Plan, which is an initiative to build a walkable, sustainable community in East Solano County for up to 400,000 people. And that's about an hour north of San Francisco. And our goal is to build a new economic engine for Solano County while helping to solve California's housing crisis. Today, we are launching a new series of conversations with leaders, experts, and practitioners across industries to explore how California can get back on track as a place of opportunity for working families. In this episode, I'm joined by Jennifer Hernandez, the lead of the West Coast Land Use and Environmental Group at Holland Knight, where she leads the environmental review and the federal and state agency permit process for complex projects. Jennifer is a Stanford-trained attorney and environmental advocate who has received numerous civil rights awards for her work over the past 3 decades on overcoming opposition that derails critical housing and other projects needed and supported by minority communities. Please share any thoughts that you have throughout the conversation in the comments, and we will be responding to you there. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I'm excited to explore your career of fighting back against regressive land and environmental policies that are working against working families and how we can get California back on track as this place of opportunity for working families that it used to be.
It's a real honor to be with you, Jan, and to be working on this project. It's extremely exciting, and I'm very, very much looking forward to making it happen with you.
Same here. Excellent. So let's get going. So I want to come back to your upbringing and how that informs your views on what you've worked on over the years. But maybe just to give people a sense, tell us about the range of projects that you have worked on and work on at Holland Knight nowadays.
Oh, sure. So it's been a really, really broad range through my now 40th year as a lawyer doing this work in California. From turning landfills or former refinery sites and getting those cleaned up and redeveloped for housing and mixed use projects on the bay's edge, like the East Shore State Park, which spans many miles from Oakland all the way to Richmond, or the former refinery site in Hercules are a couple of examples. I also had the privilege of working with the University of California as their first environmental lawyer. And in that context, I got to work on all the projects statewide for land that UC owns, all the campuses, all the hospitals, all the field stations. Incredible, incredible resource and range of project types, from removing a nuclear reactor that was sitting in the basement of a Berkeley building, all the way down to working with the latest innovations in agricultural and nanotech and other emerging technologies that require new facilities and operations and licenses. So very, very broad range of projects I've done over the years, and it's very, very fun to think about a new community project. I have done other new community projects, but the sort of archetypal community project is built around a golf course, country club concept, or a similar kind of larger, more expensive home projects. This is a unique project in East Solano, as really walkability is a key theme, along with the city stage density, not Manhattan, but also not just Levittown, a sea of homes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll get to that in a second. Maybe before we drill down into this particular project, so you had this incredible career over 40 years and this range of projects. If you go back and you try to take a macro view and say, how has attitudes towards land use changed over that period in California? If you kind of go back to the beginning of your career and then maybe compare it to the last 10 or 20 years, how have the attitudes changed and what impact do you think that's had on the state overall?
Yeah, so I started practice in the early 80s, and at that point, what we were trying to do was still build, but build in compliance with very, very stringent environmental laws. the most stringent in the country. But everyone was moving toward an outcome that resulted in a project. In the housing space, that outcome, even back in the 80s, sometimes led to less housing or more expensive and fewer units, say to preserve more open space. But the goal was we do need not just housing, but the other projects that I've worked on, and it was a how to get there rather than a whether to get there. The middle part of my career was really all about um, people's ability to sue for anything they didn't like. And we had a much bigger percentage of projects that were approved, sometimes unanimously by the city council or planning commission, supported by immediate neighbors. But there was an interest group that sued anyway. And in the middle part of my career, I think people started losing faith in whether projects would actually be built. And really elongated times for doing any construction at the infrastructure level exacerbated that. So now what I find is two troubling trends, which I think we just need to overcome if we're going to succeed as a state for working families. One is a level of kind of cynicism that anything will ever get done, and because folks who aren't as old as I have not seen California get much done, and they are dubious about the success of anything, and they don't know kind of how to make that change. And I think we've got some ideas. But the other part that's very new is coming from a wing of folks that really date all the way back to kind of, the state is overpopulated, we're over our holding capacity, there's no room for new people. In fact, we have too many people already. And they pursue a really ardent no growth or even degrowth, shrink the size of the state's population and shrink jobs. And the no growth or even degrowth people are just flat out stoppers. They want to stop everything everywhere. It's like green eggs and ham, not here, not there, not anywhere. And that's really a hard, one of the former heads of the California Attorney General unit on environmental law called it environmental terrorism, to stop housing, to stop the infrastructure that housing needs, to stop new communities from being built, no matter how walkable or sustainable. That is unfortunately too prevalent in this decade. And then we also have in this decade the no way, no how challenges to infill. Housing is the most frequently targeted project by CEQA lawsuits. And it's, people don't want change near them. So housing gets approved, and the people who don't want change file a lawsuit to stop it. So we're in a hardened, polarized time relative to earlier parts of my career.
It's to your first point, it's been fascinating to see in this project where you said people have gotten cynical and they don't think anything is going to get built. Where one of the things I didn't expect to hear back was from people who are really excited about the project, and their biggest objection was, I'll be dead by the time that it's built. And they were really sad about it. And these were young people. These were people in their 60s. These were young people.
Yeah.
So to the second point of what you said, if I steelman the opposing argument, it would be, we need to protect the environment, and that's all we're doing. All we're doing is protecting the environment. But it sounds like what you're saying is that some of these laws have been co-opted for entirely different purposes. And you and I have talked about before about how there's kind of downstream consequences of that. For example, if we don't build housing in California, it doesn't just go away. It gets built in other states that have different standards and different climates. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think even though this particular issue of blocking housing is cast most often in a sort of climate change fight prism, right? For the climate, we should all live in small apartments and take the bus and lower our greenhouse gas emissions. That's sort of one side of the debate, and that works for plenty of people. I don't want to disparage it. That's part of the housing solution. But for another part of the housing solution, for families, for example, that choose not to live in that kind of urbanized only setting, they're looking for homes, and they're going to find homes. To your point, whether it's here or in California, I think the fastest growing county was Yolo County, which is host to more suburban scale and mixed density urban. So if they, though, move to any other state in the country, they are increasing global greenhouse gas emissions because we have a very clean grid providing electricity. We have a whole bunch of very, very stringent laws that require things like water conservation and other conservation, energy conservation that reduce our carbon footprint in California. And we're blessed with this incredible climate in many of California's locations for much of the year, where opening and closing a window takes care of many days of temperature variations without having to be in a sealed apartment with no open windows. So when families give up in California, the places they typically move to, places like Texas or Nevada or Arizona, have much higher per capita greenhouse gas emissions. And if the goal is to address climate change, I've often said we should encourage more people to live in California. We have a lower per capita, by far, carbon emission profile, as well as, extremely, extremely detailed, hundreds of environmental laws that we have to comply with, multiple agency approvals that we have to, get. So environmentally sustainable development with a low carbon footprint is really the best place forward is California. And so just straight ahead, no growth, let alone degrowth, increases our carbon footprint by exporting Californians to other states.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's a difference between the politics of, or the ethics of intentions versus results.
Exactly.
People can have the intentions to protect the climate, but if you don't think of all of the downstream consequences, then the results are actually worse.
That's right. And it applies to jobs as well. I mean, California is a huge market for consumer goods. And yet we are putting some pretty significant constraints on job and employment users. A good example is food processing from fresh foods that are grown in the Central Valley. There's a window for harvesting. There's a window for processing. It's a pretty intense time. It's a 3-shift kind of 24-hour operation that's needed, which can't be run on, solar panels. So as we try to change our energy mix, there are, examples of projects that, are just not going to be able to locate in California. And then we have even worse environmental impacts because we go right across the border. This is true, for example, for the Tesla battery facility. It's right across the border in Reno, so we pretend it doesn't count as greenhouse gas emissions, even though California buys, right now, the highest percentage of Teslas. So moving it across the border does not change global climate science. It just means that we have to travel even more with trucks to get the batteries back to Fremont and put into the cars. It's a shell game that just robs California of good job opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing this need to take a global view of a lot of these things and think about all of the downstream consequences. I mean, speaking of jobs and economic opportunity, I do want to go back to where you grew up, because one of the things that I love about having you work on this project is that actually you grew up a few miles from here. And I know that kind of where and how you grew up informed a lot of the decisions about the importance of keeping businesses in California, about the importance of home ownership. So maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh, California, which is directly across the river from Rio Vista and the land south of it. very near this project. Pittsburgh was a factory town. It really boomed during World War II, but started even before then as a place where things got made. It was a town of makers. Everyone's dad either worked in one of the factories, and it was a really who's who of California and then U.S. Industrial leaders from PG&E, U.S. Steel, John Mansville, Union Carbide, Fiberboard, Dow Chemical. These were the building blocks of things that make other things, and Pittsburgh was a very factory oriented town. They're good union jobs. Both my grandfathers worked at U.S. Steel for their career. One who immigrated from Mexico, moved from the fields near Fresno, where he'd been a farm worker, to Pittsburgh and became an electrician. The other, my other grandfather was a farmer from Lodi, second son, who moved to the factories and became a machinist. My dad entered U.S. Steel right out of high school, except for a little trip to Korea in the war. But we chugged along, and there was no. It was an incredibly integrated town. It was pretty flat in terms of income, and everybody owned a home unless there was some very unusual circumstance. And the homes were priced at 2 or 3 times median income. And were easily attainable for folks with good union jobs in factories. That started to shift when I was actually out of college in the 80s and out of law school. And those facilities started to shut down. And every time one of those facilities shut down, hundreds, if not thousands, of good union jobs were lost, and they were not replaced. That trend continues to this day. U.S. Steel has finally completely shuttered its doors after limping along for a little while after my dad was laid off at age 56. What saved my parents and my grandmothers, who both lived for 20 years as widows, 20 plus years, what saved them was owning their home. They could make enough money to live, but they couldn't make enough money to live and pay a mortgage or rent when the calamitous changes occurred and those jobs were lost. So I am very committed to not just the idea, but the proven ability of California's job-generating facilities to comply with the most stringent environmental laws we impose. What I know is not the case from personal experience is those jobs aren't replaced with similar jobs, and the families that permanently lose that kind of job plunge at least to very struggling lower income folks. My dad spent 10 years as a retail clerk at Osh Hardware, making near minimum wage. My mom went back to cleaning houses. It was a total fall from the middle class upbringing that we had. At least in our world, middle class meant a stable job and paid vacations and medical coverage and stuff like that. We've just lost that. We've lost the ability of California families, especially working class families without fancy degrees, to enter into the job market and earn enough to afford housing while housing just keeps getting more expensive because we don't build enough of it.
It sounds like your parents, in some sense, were kind of one of the examples of this kind of hollowing out of the middle class. That's what really happened in California, where people increasingly say what we have well-paid professional class that lives kind of huddled around the coast. And then we have the service workers who service them, but there's nothing in the middle because we've pushed all of the middle to other states by making it so difficult to create these kind of good paying jobs here.
That's totally right from my personal perspective, Jan. And we keep seeing it in round after round. Even during the Great Recession in 2008, the first folks who lost their jobs were the union construction workers who could no longer work because we had a bank crisis that had become global. And people, I think, don't realize quite how important it is to have jobs and housing that is secure. if you've never experienced the loss of jobs or housing, or don't have people you know that have directly experienced the loss, it's pretty hard to overstate the consequence of that loss, not just in personal mental health, but it's hard to be poor, and it's very hard to live on inadequate wages if everything's just too expensive. And that causes stress that goes down to the kids. It upsets marriages. We end up with an increase in domestic violence. There's all kinds of problems that are caused when kind of the not here, not anywhere movement successfully shuts something down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think about it often a lot now, where we have two young kids, and um, if I had to commute 2 hours every day, like so many people commute in Northern California or Southern California, actually 3 hours every day between commuting there and back. And I mean, we are fortunate. We have resources, and I don't have that commute, and it's still hard. And I just can't imagine what
Yes.
it's like if you're working two minimum wage jobs and you have that commute. I mean, that's an incredible. It's kind of outrageous that that's where we ended up. That this kind of state of opportunity. This is what we created. Um,
Well, and it's really outrageous that we think that, the best way of dealing with that is to not allow people to live where they can afford to live. If you're in a self-sacrifice zone, which many working family wage earners are, you sacrifice for your family, and that sacrifice is a 3-hour unpaid commute that just is a killer. And we see people sleeping in their cars overnight rather than do the daily commute, uh, uh, and have all kinds of other adverse consequences for that. But the no growth, degrowth folks stop infrastructure even more easily than they stop housing, and that has created the circumstance that we have now. That's why it's so exciting for the jobs commitment, which is one of the voter guarantees for this project, to be front and center. And you know, Solano County has a lot of long distance commuters, and it's a pretty brutal way to have to live every
Absolutely,
day.
we hear it every day. Let's talk about what it's going to take to fix the situation. So you and I have talked a lot about the importance of starter homes and being able to get on the housing ladder. There's been a lot of reforms over the last few years. The California YIMBYs have done an amazing job getting a lot of those reforms through. The numbers are not yet moving. It's going to be a major part of the solution, but it looks like we're going to have to do more. How do you assess what it's going to take to start producing homes that working families can afford, and starter homes, and all the challenges that exist
Yeah,
in both infill as well as greenfield, where we are not building starter homes either?
right,
I mean, you work on
right.
this whole range of projects. You're one of the few people who does both greenfield and infill. So what do you think it's going to take to get back on track?
Yeah, so I just finished a chapter in a report on Latino access to upward mobility in California, and wrote the housing chapter. And the two things I focused on, there are others, and I want to also shout out to the YIMBYs for moving the needle significantly in California to prevent many of the blocking tools that we've had to contend with for decades. So it's easier to get approvals, all things considered. But there's two things that are still really problematic. One is, as a result of various policy decisions over the decades, it has become common to charge very, very high fees for new homes. And so if you charge, as San Francisco at its height did, nearly $300,000 per apartment as a cost that doesn't go into the land price, the construction, the labor, then you have an inherently unaffordable unit, as we see from some of the affordable housing proposals that are now circulating, and approved projects that are coming at a cost of delivery of $1 million a unit. And a good chunk of that is soft costs paid to people like me, and frankly, we shouldn't have to have people like me lawyering these kind of projects, but also hard fees. And what those fees mean is they're passed along to the homeowner, and they get triple charged. They have to pay a higher purchase price in the first instance, $100,000 or $200,000 more. In the second instance, they have to take out a bigger loan, a mortgage, to pay for that extra cost. And in the third instance, their tax base, which is based on the housing price, is way higher than their incumbent neighbors. And we have that fee issue in part because it's easy uh, to force people who aren't there to pay high fees. Prospective residents typically don't show up, and the YIMBYs have really turned the corner on that by sending folks, on the ground to planning commissions and city councils and saying, no, we need this housing. But fees is one issue. The other issue is the litigation cycle. It simply should not be the case that an economic competitor who's a landlord sues another landlord who wants to build or expand an apartment project. We've got cases like that. There's also plenty of cases, like I say, where there's one or two or three really vehement folks who typically are my generation and just don't want new people. They shouldn't be able to sue either. If you decide you want to live, 8 blocks from the UC campus in Berkeley, then you shouldn't be able to file a CEQA lawsuit when UC proposes a dorm that's going to still be 4 blocks away, but is a dorm that people need for housing.
For people at university, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And it's especially important as an equity issue. I mean, the people who are deprived of housing are newer, younger, browner, poorer than the people who already own housing. The people who, in my generation, who own housing, that's kind of our pension program, right? We'll use it as equity, as my grandmothers did when we stop working.
That's why you think of housing as a civil rights issue.
I do, very much so, very much so. And it's been impossible. That commute you described, my brother, who's a welder, spent his career, the first part of his career commuting from Brentwood, which had starter homes at affordable prices, to Oakland. And that was brutal even then. And it caused him to move to Chico, the hills above Chico, where the commute was, basically not a factor, and housing was still affordable. Last thing I'll say on this, though, general issue is a lot of the housing reform work has concentrated on infill locations, and I think that's a really important part of the solution. But there's no one size fits all. There was a terrific outreach session in Fresno recently in Spanish, where folks were told, the housing solution for Fresno is going to be small apartments in the downtown. And I think that would be terrific for Fresno. But the response of the people was, no, why can't we have a house just like you? Why can't we buy into an 800 square foot home, which is the home size that my parents raised 3 kids in, 2 bedroom, 1 bath. So it's important that very, very smart policymakers with fancy degrees living on the coast recognize the diversity of California's needs. And it's a civil rights issue to meet those needs. And that includes housing and jobs.
So let's talk about how we're trying to do some of that in East Solano. Maybe to start, I still remember the first time we met to talk about the project, maybe a couple of years ago. Tell me, what was your initial reaction when we talked about it, and how has that evolved over time?
I was just stunned. First off, because I've been looking at Rio Vista and Solano County for my whole life, right? I that's what I saw out of the parochial school I went to next to the PG&E plant in Pittsburgh, and I didn't realize the wonder of the place. It is literally wonderful compared to some of the other projects that I've worked on in the past. And I just didn't know that existed in California or in the Bay Area. It was like a unicorn. And then when you laid out the history, for example, the Army Corps map showing that this would be a natural city, again, it was like, ugh, how can I not know this? It's my 40th year in practice. How can I not know? And I ticked off all the irritating or challenging issues, sea level rise and, endangered species and water supply and whatnot. And there was a very, very solid answer for all of that, including transportation, given your proximity to Amtrak and other transportation solutions. So it was really amazing, and it was it kind of restored my sense of optimism about the future. That a very, very big investment, which is always required for these larger projects, was maybe going to help Solano County, not pass over Solano County, which is what often happens, as it happens in East Contra Costa County, where I grew up. So it was a it was a surprise, and it was ultimately a thrill after I drilled you with 80 questions or something.
Yeah, probably. I think you had more than anyone else, but I expected that. It was a fun conversation. I remember it. I probably remember that conversation for the rest of my life. And so we've been working on it now together for a couple of years, and you really sit in the middle of all of these amazing people that we've brought on board to work on this. The urban designers and planners and transportation engineers and environmental scientists and geotech engineers. And many of these people are people that you've worked with your whole life. And it seems like, it's been incredible to see people's reactions to it. Why do you think people are so excited about this particular project?
I think a few reasons. One is kind of usually reported in the opposite way, but one is really the commitment of some Silicon Valley leaders to California and recognition of the needs that aren't being met by kind of the existing incumbent special interest group collectively. And so it, I think, shone a real spotlight on, if we want to build sustainable communities, they need to be at scale, and they need to include jobs, and they don't need to be auto dependent, around a golf course. So I was frankly thrilled by the investment commitments. I also think that this all of the above strategy for housing, where there's no one answer, there's no one climate, there's no one economy, there's no one household type. We're different. And I think it's really important that people have the option of moving to a walkable urban environment instead of, driving as far as they have to go to qualify for housing that's a little more conventional. And it's also the case that the infill housing solution, which is going to work, I hope, for lots of people, is very expensive and is not going to work for all people. So it was a real recognition, I think, of the needs of California, in part because this project embodies the flexibility of a city. And so when you're building a row house, it won't be with a template of colors that you can modify only with approval from the HOA, the homeowners association. This is an effort to be much more organically flexible, whether it's a 3-story row house or a 4-story row house, and includes 1 or 8 housing units. It will feel like a nice community, which there are plenty of these examples, say in San Francisco, and they're just completely unaffordable. So
they are complete oasis for the rich because there's so few of them.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
it's a tournament with a fixed number of slots.
Yeah.
Yeah. People
Yeah. There's always skepticism about whether new housing will actually reduce costs by trying to manage the supply to what's needed. But we've got good examples now at scale. One new housing project is not going to really touch the market. But at scale, places like Austin and Salt Lake City had a huge building boom as those cities grew during and after the pandemic, and even before. They surged with growth. They built the housing they need as they went, and now people are finding, I think, that there's enough housing, and when landlord occupancy rates drop below 90%, rents drop quite a bit, and that then trickles up to
So,
the housing market.
so we have an actual proof for the fact that building more
Yes, yeah, yeah,
it is what makes the rent more affordable. I mean, you can just look at those examples over the last couple of years,
that's right.
and it hasn't taken them 20 years.
No,
They've been able to do that in just a few years, and they built enough, and suddenly
yeah.
people can afford much more so than before.
One of my friends really refuses to use the term housing crisis. He uses the term housing policy crisis, and the same applies to jobs. It's not like we don't have, land and hammers and wood and whatnot to build. We know how to do it. It's not a crisis. It's a crisis of process, and those process steps have just been layered on really since the early 70s to make it harder and harder to finish anything and easier to sue to block something or to make the costs of whatever we're building just out of control. So,
Absolutely. I mean, if we look at the number of, I mean, we've kind of accepted it as a reality, but if we look at the number of jobs that Californian companies have been exporting to other states, it's completely crazy.
yeah,
It's not like these companies want to send these jobs to Texas or Florida. They don't. But we've just made it impossible for them to grow here in an affordable way. And at the same time, we have hundreds of thousands of California residents commuting hours every day to for their work. The whole thing makes no sense.
yeah. I mean, not only does it not make sense from an environmental protection standpoint, especially at a global level, but it's really discriminatory. It really is a civil rights outrage that we've stopped allowing for jobs, housing, and infrastructure at costs that are, normal. California's costs are ridiculously high for everything, and again, it's a housing and related infrastructure policy crisis. And if we're going to, for example, allow a lot more solar to be built a lot more quickly because of the housing crisis, we've tried to streamline some of that red tape. Some folks are calling it cutting the green tape. But we need to be a little bit more all of the above for people-oriented challenges too, like water supply, storage, and other projects that have long been recognized as needed, but are blocked either formally in a lawsuit by the no growth, degrowth people, or informally by the weight and cost and time of the bureaucratic process that just gets out of control. The famous, what is it, $1.3 million single toilet in San Francisco is a recent example, but it was a donated toilet and the land was there. And so how did it get that high? It was all process costs.
It was all process and permitting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, no,
Wow.
it's crazy. It's like a prohibition on the use of prefab buildings. So I got this thing donated, and it still costs that much. And they just have to go through so many hoops, so much bureaucracy, and none of those bureaucrats are swinging a hammer.
Well, that's the other part of it. The more money that we spend on process, the less money we can spend on good paying jobs for the construction workers who are actually building it. That's the other inequity in the whole system.
Absolutely.
You and I could talk about it for hours. We're going to be running out of time shortly. In closing, I want to ask two questions. Let's say that this works and it gets built in the best possible way that you and the dozens of people on the planning team and engineering team and myself and many others hope it will be. If you fast forward 20, 30 years, what do you think this will have done for Solano County?
Well, I think the job creation component in Solano County is huge, and there's going to be a whole lot of families whose parents are going to be able to show up at dinner time, at a reasonable dinner time, and help kids with homework and not have to spend their life commuting. Successful communities also have the ability to attract a lot of young families who are starting out. And that just brings such a vibrancy to neighborhoods and those trends then flip. The neighbors age, the parents age, the kids kind of move in. And the beautiful part of this community design is there will be housing options to accommodate people all along that spectrum. I think another one of the sort of brutalist and ultimately wrong-headed ideas that comes out of academics is you move into a nice rental apartment in a city, you end up married, you end up having a kid, and in my case you end up with a mother's group that become pretty close friends, and then preschooler parents who become pretty close friends. But there's this notion that when you make that family shift, you leave your native environment, whether that's Mission Bay or anything else. And in fact, what people want is to be able to stay in their community and shift their housing types as they move through different stages in life. So seniors don't want to have to move to Florida. They want to stay where the kids are. And if the kids are around, then they can downsize. The kids can, buy into an entry-level home. And that variety of housing typology is all at the East Solano Plan core. And it's a place where people should be able to live their entire life, and new people will populate it. And so there won't be this kind of old clique thing going on where, there's some incumbent folks with power that are in their minds, working really hard to make life better. But ultimately, that's not very welcoming to a whole bunch of new voters that might upset that.
Yeah, the point you made about people staying in the same communities, there's all of these discussions about this epidemic of loneliness in America. And in my opinion, so much of it comes down to the land use choices we've made, where we've kind of segregated everyone and made people move around far away from their families and friends at different stages of life. And then the whole thing just breaks down. And so I'm really excited about building a place where we don't have to do this.
Exactly right.
Last question for you. If this succeeds, what do you think this will do for the region and for California overall?
Well, folks don't like to admit it some of the time, but what we have now is a mega region that extends from Sacramento and its suburbs all the way down to San Francisco, and then south, well past San Jose, and then east into Stockton and beyond. That mega region is going to succeed if we have jobs that match where people live, and it's going to continue to fail if we don't allow housing in existing communities at scale, at an affordable and attainable price, and keep all the jobs in one place, and ask people to live, or only allow people to live in these brutal commute zones. So I think bringing jobs to Solano County and creating this framework of urban style walkability just brings a whole new model to the region. And there are needs for exactly these communities. And I hope it will inspire others, as well as create more connectivity between the Sacramento and Bay Area communities. But I really think it's because it's part of a county, it's not going to try to upset the city politics, and because it's located where it is, it seems very, very suitable for what folks said nearly 100 years ago, which is, why isn't this a city? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% right. I think increasingly, as you said, Northern California is this one large region, and we have jobs at the edge of that region in Sacramento and San Jose and Palo Alto and San Francisco, and there just isn't much in the middle of that region. And so I think this is an opportunity to think of the project as infill for that larger region and really rebalance the jobs and bring them to the middle of that area.
Well, that's right.
Which would reduce traffic for everyone. I mean, it would reduce the number of people driving from Solano County or from East Contra Costa County to San Francisco or Palo Alto. This would be a win for the whole region, I think. An opportunity
absolutely. And frankly, we're just restoring the jobs housing balance. I mean, when I grew up, there were a ton of jobs on the East Shore. Fremont was another sort of factory area. The jobs lined the river with all of the industrial facilities. You may or may not like the fact that they were built on the river, during the war, World War II or otherwise. Um, but those were huge numbers of good paying jobs that have been lost over the years. And I think we need to recreate job creation as a real thing, as an attainable thing. And like I said, the voter guarantee on the type of job and the number of jobs is, I think, a game changer. And I have not been in a project that has made that kind of commitment. This is a real breakthrough. I've had wonderful opportunities with wonderful new communities and new housing and other projects that are fantastic. But this is unique in what you're trying to do. And I think it's, frankly, would be a great example for my hometown, Pittsburgh, to try to emulate.
Well, that's high praise coming from you, given all of the things that you worked on. Getting to work with you over the last couple of years has been one of the highlights of working on this for the last 8. So it's been so much fun, a real honor and privilege, and it was great to have you here today. Thanks so much, Jennifer Hernandez.
Well, thank you, and right back at you. You're amazing. What a leader, what a visionary. I think you could bring it home. Thank you.
All right, let's get to work. Thanks, Jennifer. See you soon.